Hello, BookTube. I have a bit of an extra Comic Book Wednesday for you, an added thing. I got it the other day at the Brattle, and I didn't mention it in my Brattle haul then because I thought, well, that's a natural thing to talk about on a comic book day. It's a weird little thing. I've seen them before, but I don't think I've ever owned one. They're from the 70s. They're flashback reprint volumes of old Marvel and DC comics from the 40s. And I think that in some realms, these flashback reprint volumes are themselves now collectible. I can't imagine that there's any value, any market value to any of them, because otherwise they wouldn't have been for sale for $1 at the Brattle. But this one I had to get. It's Captain Marvel Jr. This was 10 cents. It's like 6 Captain Marvel Jr. adventures and a whole bunch of adventures of other characters. And it's Captain Marvel Jr. has always appealed to me. This one starts off with a reprint of Captain Marvel Jr.'s first appearance. And it advises us ahead of time that there is an editorial board, an advisory board, to ensure the highest quality of this comic. To help us maintain high standards of wholesome entertainment in our comic publications, we have enlisted the aid of the distinguished individuals whose names are given above. One of them is the Reverend John Tynan, a great Jesuit from the early part of the 20th century. Another is Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, and the advisory board is rounded off with Eleanor Roosevelt. Show me another superhero who has Eleanor Roosevelt signing off on his adventures. And these are the adventures of the world's mightiest boy. He's Freddie Freeman. He's a teenage boy who's in a boat with his grandfather when a supervillain, Captain Nazi, throws his grandfather overboard and throws Freddie Freeman overboard as well. And Freddie Freeman is injured. He is crippled. And he's at death's doorstep. And Billy Batson, Captain Marvel, saves him from the ocean. And Captain Marvel's alter ego, Billy Batson, desperately wants to save his life. And so brings him to the underground lair, the secret subway underground lair of the millennia-old wizard Shazam, who gave Billy Batson his powers originally. And the wizard is a little cranky when Billy Batson does this. He says, "Who dares to disturb the sleep of the 1,000-year sleep of Shazam?" And, that line makes me wonder how many other people ever visit this place. Of course, it's going to be Billy Batson. And if you're sleeping for 1,000 years, then where is Captain Marvel getting his powers from every time he says that magic word? Isn't that you? One way or another, Billy Batson begs him to save Freddie Freeman's life, and he says, "Well, I can't change the past. If you want to save his life, you can. You can give him a fraction of your powers." That doesn't make any sense, of course. We're not asking you to change the past. We're asking you to save this boy by giving him superpowers the way you did me. But Captain Marvel is, of course, perfectly willing to do that. So he gives Freddie Freeman a fraction of his powers. Now, in the 40s, nobody cared how that worked. It was much, much later in the 80s and 90s where there was a long run of Captain Marvel, drawn by the great Jerry Ordway, in which it's made explicit that when one of the other Marvel characters, Mary Marvel or Captain Marvel Jr., says their magic word, they siphon a portion of energy from Captain Marvel, so that if, for instance, the entire Marvel family were all to appear in costume together, they would all be significantly weaker than Captain Marvel would be alone. They divide up a certain set level of powers. I don't know how that works. If Captain Marvel's strength and speed and invulnerability are all infinite, as they are, well, half of infinity is still infinity, so it doesn't effectively matter in these stories. And Captain Marvel tells Freddie Freeman to say his name. Not Shazam, but Captain Marvel. So he does, and a lightning bolt strikes, and all of a sudden, we have Captain Marvel Jr., a teenage boy in a tight blue costume. And questions start forming right away. Like, for instance, when Billy Batson says his magic word, he goes from being a 12-year-old boy to a grown man who doesn't look anything like him. When Freddie Freeman says his magic word, Freddie Freeman gets superpowers. And he's not lame anymore. He becomes a lycra-clad super hottie. But as it is stressed over and over and over again in these 1940s adventures, including everything in here. These are black and white reprints. in every story where he appears, it comes up over and over and over again that Captain Marvel Jr. is physically identical to Freddie Freeman, except he's not crippled. So if he puts on Freddie Freeman's clothing, then no one can tell them apart because they're the same person. So first of all, you want to wonder why. Why is that the case? Why is it that Freddie Freeman doesn't turn into some other avatar like Billy Batson does? And second, you're curious to know, well, okay, if you get your superpowers by saying Captain Marvel, and your name is Captain Marvel Jr., then you can't ever introduce yourself. You can't ever tell anybody who you are. In these stories and in every other, I love Captain Marvel Jr. I wish there were a big, remastered, full-color omnibus edition of his entire run, of all of his adventures. He was fairly popular. Captain Marvel himself was hugely popular. But Captain Marvel Jr. was really popular. And as far as I know, there's never been a volume like that. The closest that we come is an old showcase edition of DC Comics that I really like. I have it, but it isn't everything. For instance, there's almost nothing in here that's in that volume. I would love to see these in color. But I'm a big fan of Captain Marvel Jr. adventures. They're just the right combination of visually arresting and dumb and really awkward. Like, for instance, the moment in one of these issues where he meets Charles de Gaulle and the illustrator obviously didn't care at all. He thought, oh, Charles de Gaulle, you got him in an encyclopedia here? I need to know what he looks like. Draws a passable Basset Hound-like face of Charles de Gaulle, but totally muffs the fact that de Gaulle was freakishly tall, so he's the same size as Captain Marvel Jr. when they meet. Because you wouldn't know that. If you're just looking through an encyclopedia for what this guy looks like, you wouldn't care how tall he is. It would never occur to you. I love these adventures. They are terrific. They set limits on Captain Marvel Jr., for instance. If he has to fly from America or even England to what is obviously North Africa, it takes him a long time. It takes him. The writers obviously don't think to make him that much faster than what they consider to be air traffic's maximum speed. That's kind of fun. He's completely invulnerable. He's completely unstoppable physically. He has a dutiful, patriotic attitude. Always caring about Uncle Sam, always caring about, defeating America's enemies. Same thing as Captain Marvel and later Mary Marvel at the same time also spouted in their comics, without ever tripping over the obvious next step, which is, okay, well, if you hate America's enemies so much and you're bulletproof and you never get tired and you're stronger than anybody, what are you doing here instead of in the fields of France? Another thing that always amazed me, that always puzzles me about Captain Marvel Jr., more so than any of the other Marvel characters, is when Mary Marvel comes along. She's Billy Batson's relative, and she is the same way. When she gets her powers, she says Shazam, and she becomes Mary Marvel, but is Mary Marvel. She is Mary Batson in every way. She's physically identical. But the thing that always confused me about Freddie Freeman is once he says his magic word, Captain Marvel, and becomes Captain Marvel Jr., why would he ever say it again? Why would he ever go back to being a crippled pauper who sells newspapers and lives in a shack? Why would he do that? There's no advantage to him in ever reverting to what these issues called his secret identity. I don't know why he would ever do it. Captain Marvel? Sure. We don't really know who Captain Marvel is. We know who Billy Batson is. Captain Marvel seems to have a separate identity of its own, and Billy Batson might want to have a life as a kid. And Mary Marvel the same way, Mary Batson as well. But Freddie Freeman, why would he ever want to go back to that life? Especially since, even if he liked that life for some picaresque, down and out Jack Kerouac kind of idea of living it rough as a normal person and earning a living, still, why would he say his magic world? It's already been established that he's identical. They are the same person. Only one is able-bodied and the other is not. So one is superpowered. Presumably doesn't need to eat or anything like that. Why wouldn't if Captain Marvel Jr. wants to experience real life as Freddie Freeman, why wouldn't he just put on Freddie Freeman's clothing and live that way without ever saying his magic word again? It confuses me. It confuses me, but I love these anyway. I especially like the way there's a kind of a realism in the artwork of Captain Marvel Jr. that is nowhere present in Captain Marvel. Nowhere. The artists, there were a couple of them, and a couple of them did signature work, and there's a realism involved. There's shadows, there's brickwork, there's lines on faces, especially villains, but also Captain Marvel himself, Captain Marvel Jr. himself, is often in superhero comics in the 1940s, if there were younger superheroes like Bucky or Toro, or any of the other teen sidekicks, they were given weird miniature adult bodies, and that was that. It was just no more thought was given to it than that. Whereas from the beginning and all through his 1940s run, Captain Marvel Jr. is drawn like a teenage boy instead of like a young adult or like a child. It's fascinating. I wonder what contemporary readers thought of this character. Maybe I'm overdoing it. I might be overthinking it. They probably just liked another Marvel series because it's a terrific series. Absolutely silly. Not just because of the reasons that I mentioned, but also the same thing is true in this that is true in Captain Marvel and in Mary Marvel, which is that nobody ever puts two and two together. These characters don't make any effort at all to hide their so-called secret identity. When Freddie Freeman is in trouble, he's got gangsters crowding all around him or someone's pointing a gun at him, he just says his magic word. Lightning bolt comes down out of nowhere and Captain Marvel Jr. springs into action in full view of everybody else. And yet in issue after issue, people say, what the? There was a bolt of lightning. It's that Captain Marvel Jr. kid. Where'd the Freddie Freeman kid go? When it's all happening right in front of them, you wonder what's going on. And also, how do they know his name? He's never told it to them. How do they know who he is? Anyway, I couldn't pass this up at the Brattle. It gave me joy, especially since there are adventures in here that are not in the one volume of Captain Marvel Jr. that I have. I will wait patiently for DC Comics to make a big anthology of Captain Marvel Jr. Not the Captain Marvel family, but just he had his own comic, his own appearances, and they had Eleanor Roosevelt's stamp of approval. So I'm hoping that happens, especially if Shazam, the movie, is a huge success. Then DC Comics will have every incentive in the world to flush out all of these old great Captain Marvel adventures. In fact, they're coming out with a volume. I think the Marvel Family is what it's called, or something like that. There's a new reprint volume, a new hardcover coming out soon, this spring. But again, it's going to be a mixed bag. When I'm really partial to Captain Marvel Jr., so we'll see. Maybe there'll be a volume like that. But I wanted to add this since I missed it I missed it when I was doing that Brattle Hall, and it is a comic book, and it is Wednesday, which is New Comic Book Day. This is very old comic book day. Captain Marvel Jr. There's a whole crowd of Marvel characters in the new Captain Marvel Shazam comic book series that is ongoing from DC Comics, but so far the issues I've looked at have been so god-awful that I haven't bothered to even talk about them on this channel. They don't look anything like the traditional. And with Captain Marvel, it should be traditional. DC should not muck around with tradition. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. But we have other stuff to talk about. Literary stuff to talk about. Book stuff to talk about. So I will get to that. Thank you, BookTube.